All right, and we are underway. So welcome to episode 2 in series 2. Welcoming back a guest from our previous series. So in the last episode of the previous series, we had Matt Cumani. But today, Matt, we're going to speak to you about training techniques. So something very different. Welcome along.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and hopefully I can share something that people might find interesting. Hopefully not too useful if there are any other trainers listening, but I try not to give away any trade secrets, but it's great to be here.
Yeah, I think throughout the webinars, obviously first season was based around understanding how to get involved in horse ownership, but now a lot of the people following the webinars are involved in horse ownership or have been for a while. And I guess there's a lot of questions in every webinar around training, and I know that every trainer has different methods, but hopefully by having one focused purely on training, you'll be able to shed some light on some of those questions that maybe we haven't had the chance to go a little bit more in depth with. So we'll move right along. Firstly, what got you involved in it? What did you do prior to training? What was Matt Cumani, the ex, what did you do before you started training?
Well, I suppose training was always slightly on the cards, or always a possible route for me, given that my father and my grandfather were both trainers. My grandfather started off as a businessman and became a trainer sort of reasonably late in life, when he was sort of mid-40s. And quite quickly became champion trainer in Italy. My father then trained to be a doctor when he was a young lad, but decided to set up training in the UK. And when I was younger, I wasn't sure that I necessarily wanted to be a trainer. I certainly didn't want to go into it straight from school. So I was quite keen to have a look at the world, and I actually worked in London for a fair bit. I did a couple of little stints, internships with investment banks, firstly Bear Stearns and then Lehman Brothers, who both of which led the GFC. So that didn't go down too well. And then I worked for Michael Howard in the 2005 general election in the UK, which was absolutely fascinating, really interesting to see how an election campaign works and how it's set up. We had a really good team of young people, and we went around the country basically finding out what local issues were and how we might approach them and make our candidate look good. He didn't win the general election, unfortunately, but I think he definitely set the sort of reset the political feeling in the UK and paved the way for the current government that's been in now for a number of terms. So it was really interesting, but I think once I'd done that and I'd lived in London and had got that out of my system, I was very keen to do something that really what I think was my calling and what I felt I had a natural talent for, without having to sort of reinvent the wheel too much. I felt that a lot of what I knew about horses and animals and how to train horses, I felt was part of my upbringing, and it seemed natural to go back to that and do perhaps something that I'd be best at.
Yeah, and obviously we will get to the family line soon, but before we get too involved with the questions, I'd love to have as many questions as possible from our participants tonight. So Matt, you've got a hat there, a Cumani Racing cap, I believe. And that will be given away to the best question of the night from a participant. So obviously I will ask a lot of questions, but if we can get as many participant questions as possible, and that way we're covering them. I've got a lot here which they've sent through as homework as well. So another question, I guess, is in training, your early mornings and late nights and, very hard work. Where did you get the time, but where did you meet your wife? So something, a little bit different to training.
Yeah, it was actually through my sister and at my sister's wedding to an Aussie. And I met her there, and then it wasn't for a couple of years really that I sort of got to know her, and then eventually popped the question. But yes, the trainers' wives do have to be very long suffering. It is quite an intense job. It's not one you can really ever get too much of a break from. and while her family's not directly involved in racing, her grandfather was a prominent figure in racing in New South Wales, and in fact there's a race named after him, PJ Bell. So there is a link there, and I think I'd like to think her father and her family love the fact that there is another link to racing again. I know they're all pretty excitable punters, so I need to be careful not to over egg a tip every now and then. And I am a terrible tipster, so I'm not sure that's going to go down very well with the in-laws particularly. But I think they do enjoy it, and certainly enjoy following our horses.
Yep, and I've got some questions coming in already, but they do fit into some of the topics that we're going to, so I'll try and lead us to those. But I guess you've answered why you became a trainer and what sort of led you into it. But what mentors have you had? Would you say, obviously, your father and grandfather are your main mentors, and then which other mentors have you had on top of that in your career so far?
Well, unfortunately, my grandfather could never be a mentor because unfortunately he died the year I was born, so I never got to meet him. But my grandmother, his wife, was a real horsewoman, one of the first amateur female riders in Italy, and used to win the amateur category before there was a women's sort of division. She was a fantastic horsewoman. So without learning anything directly from her, because she wasn't riding when I was around, but I think I got a lot of strength from her. My father was my biggest mentor, without a doubt. Just growing up around him and working for him and with him, but also other people I've worked for. I worked for Ed Dunlop when I first came back into racing. And then I went to America and worked both on the East Coast and the West Coast. First of all, for Todd Pletcher, who was one of and still is one of the biggest trainers in America. Learned a huge amount from him, and then went to the West Coast and worked for Paddy Gallagher, who's a very different kind of trainer, a much smaller scale, sort of 20 to 30 to 40 horses. Much more sort of directly hands-on, and a very different type of character, but learned a huge amount about not only racing in America, but also how to run a big business, and how to deal with staff and how to train different kinds of horses. When I moved to Australia, having then in between worked for my father for 3 years, I worked for Chris Waller, and I think that was fascinating and really set me on the path to setting up training here in Australia, and gave me a good sort of grounding as to and a bit of confidence that I'd know it wasn't like I was coming fresh from America or England and trying to adapt on the fly. I'd watched Chris and how he trained his horses in those 8 to 10 months, and it gave me a really good sort of baseline, I suppose, for how to train horses here in Australia. And I could start with that and then, try and bring in some of my other influences from around the world. But I always had that baseline so that I knew that if things weren't working, I could go back to that. And I think that was really important to have that sort of confidence behind me, so that if things don't work, you can go back to something does work. I mean, Chris Waller is the one of the top 2 trainers in Australia, and really useful to have that sort of knowledge of how he does things, so that I can always revert back to that and know that if all else fails, that's one way of training that certainly does work.
Makes sense entirely. What sort of crossover to other sports do you see with training? Do you see any crossover? That's one of the questions there. So that question was from Ryan Roberts.
Yeah. Hi, Ryan. Look, it's difficult because I've never performed or trained at an elite level in other sports, but I think there is a fair amount of crossover. I think you probably need to be a bit careful not to make too much of a comparison, because particularly from a medical point of view, because we are very different beasts, and it might be easy to say, oh, well, my back hurts when I do too much heavy lifting, and so that horse, his back probably hurts when he has to carry too much weight in a race. I mean, I think those two things are so, you can't compare them at all. The horse is a completely different animal to a human. They're different pressures, and And I think you can end up going down a rabbit hole if you try and compare them too much. But I think there are certain things, for example, understanding heart rates and lactates and lung capacity and lots of other training tools and technologies that could be applied and used. Unfortunately, a lot of them aren't quite there yet, and they're quite expensive, and they're not 100% accurate. But there are a number of companies that are really developing them, and I think in the next 5 years we'll see a huge advance in that sort of technologies with lots of nanotech that will give us all sorts of readings from the horse, even sort of pressure readings between the foot and the shoe, right through to cadence and the movement of the horse, stride length, and all those things that are actually available at the moment. And I think we'll see that really start to integrate into training. At the moment, you can get kits that you can put on a horse, and it'll give you a reading for that horse, and each kit gives you one reading, and it's quite a lot of work to get that data and then to analyze it and then compare it to the rest of the population. One day we'll have it so that every horse will produce that data every day, and there'll be very little work to actually to gather that data, and you'll just have it as a training tool there. And I think that's when it'll be really at its most useful. Of course, when everyone's doing it, it's then difficult to get a competitive edge. But I don't think that would be the idea of how to use it for me. It would be more to just improve what we're doing as trainers, just to make sure we know exactly what's happening with our horses and make sure that we can identify problems before they become serious problems.
Yeah, we had Henry Dwyer on Monday night, and he was sort of saying that at this stage of the data that was coming in via sports science type of things in the industry is actually adding more pressure to trainers because there's more data. But he sees the evolution of being, the more data that comes in, maybe that becomes a specialist position for people to then collate that and bring it to the trainers, just like other sports. And Matt Fisher actually asked a question which you've answered there. So good question there, Matt, as well. What's your favourite country track?
I have to say I've got a real soft spot for a lot of them. I really like the country track, and I think that while there's a little bit of a push to consolidate some of the tracks in Victoria and perhaps reduce some of the tracks that are costing a little bit of money to maintain and only race once a year, I think it'd be a real shame to lose them, because it's what sets Australian racing apart, I think, from the rest of the world. And not only does it bring racing to that part of the country, and they have a real loyal following. Like the Burrenbeat Cup here, they race here once a year. It gets huge crowds, and those are people that may not go racing normally, but they do for that one day a year. And it perhaps introduces a whole range of people to the sport. I think it's really important for bringing the sport to the public, but also for recruitment. Having these country tracks dotted all around Australia is vital to provide holiday jobs for young kids, and those young kids may then decide to become strappers or riders or trainers or owners in the future. I think it's really important that we don't, for the sake of economizing everything, consolidate too much to just our big major country tracks and city tracks, because I think we'll really lose a bit of the character of the sport. As for, I'm trying to getting to answering your question as to which is my favourite country track. I suppose I really quite like Camperdown. I think that's a fun, real country track. I think it's got a nice long straight. I think our horses go quite well there. And while we don't race there very often, it is one that I certainly enjoy going to.
Yeah, and I've got loads of good questions coming through, guys. The reason some have been asked and some haven't, and not in order, is because I know that some of the topics we'll get to those. So a couple of questions there about why Ballarat. So we might just move to the next one there, Matt. Obviously, you're looking to make it on your own as a trainer and doing a really successful job. So I just might point out that you've got pretty much 20% winners in your last 50 starts and a 13% win ratio from 182 starts. That's not a bad start for a trainer in his first few years, doing really well. But it must be tough following on from your father, who, if you look at that right hand side there, I took some stats down. He has group winners and group 1 winners in 11 different countries, 20 group winners in his final 21 years as a trainer. So pretty impressive, and not a bad upbringing for yourself. So I guess, how does the son of a legend end up in Ballarat, of all places?
Well, I suppose there's a couple of things to cover there. First of all, yeah, my father did an amazing job as a trainer, really. I don't think I could ever really compete. And so I don't wake up every morning thinking I've got to get those 50 or so group 1s. I hope I do get to that point, and I hope I do manage to eclipse him. There is some, happy competitiveness within the family, certainly. I think it'll be very difficult to try and win stakes races in 11 different countries. I think it's actually 13, funnily enough. And I think that was a record alongside Godolphin. But I think it's just very difficult to do from Australia, unfortunately. Much
That's
easier,
a Wikipedia problem.
Yeah. But from the UK, it's obviously a lot easier to do. But he was one of the pioneers of international travel with horses, and did a very, very good job of it, because it's not easy to take a horse across to America, or to Asia, or even down to Australia. And, he wasn't the first person to do it, but he was certainly one of the people that managed to do it regularly and produce regularly, good results from horses that, would come down to Australia every year or go to Asia every year. So I think it would be crazy for me to really try and expect that I'm going to be able to do what he did, because of the different environment. But I do hope that I can achieve, at least half of his success. And I suppose why I came to Australia, I suppose it's a little bit similar to why he set up training in the UK. He is fully born and bred Italian. His father was champion trainer in Italy. But he identified that actually the stronger racing nation was the UK, and that's where the opportunity lied. For me, while the UK is still a very strong racing nation, it is suffering a little bit, and its future is, I think, somewhat in doubt, even though it's probably suffering a very slow death. In 20 years, it's difficult to know where the racing industry will be. Unfortunately, they sold out to, or the government sold out a lot of their leverage to the bookies back in the 60s and 70s, and as a result, the racing industry there finds it very difficult to generate money, and therefore prize money suffers, and that makes it very difficult to attract new people. Whereas Australia has got a great model, there's a great strength, there's huge amounts of prize money, a really exciting progressive racing industry, one that's got close links to Asia, and it just seemed to me like a land of opportunity when it comes to racing. And obviously, I'm not the first Englishman to come down here, not the first Englishman to move to Ballarat. Archie Alexander was here before me, but I do remember coming round and going around with Terry Henderson, who's played a big part in convincing me to come down here. Terry Henderson of OTI Racing. And he took me around some of the Victorian race courses, and Ballarat was the one I liked most, and mainly, I suppose, because of its proximity to a lot of country tracks and city tracks, but also because of the hill track we have here. It's a unique feature, and certainly helps sell the stable and how we train, but also, more importantly, gives horses an opportunity or options to do different things on different days. So, and I think that's the key thing, and what makes Ballarat the closest thing we have in Australia to my hometown of Newmarket in the UK, where we've got 70 kilometres of gallops, various different surfaces, and while we're still a fair bit behind that here at Ballarat, it's the closest thing we had to providing all those options for our horses. And so for me, it was a bit of a no-brainer coming here. And I'm pleased that a lot of other people are doing the same.
And David Barkley says, what do you consider the biggest differences between, we will talk about it a little bit more, but the biggest differences between the UK and Australia? And also Darren Fleming says, European and Australian training methods seem to be becoming closer with Danny O'Brien. And also he watched a documentary on Aidan O'Brien recently, and obviously their training methods are more similar than they have been in the past.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an understanding between both nations. Fun enough, I think it goes backwards and forwards as well. That there are different ways of doing things, and that you don't necessarily have to do it in the same way as the person you learned off does it or did it. And I think I think Danny O'Brien's probably the most high profile that's recently been training his horses a bit more like the English way. I think it's that realization that you don't have to follow this path that's been successful in the past, and that's been quite a hard thing for me to keep making sure that I don't revert back to just what's being done before. So, for example, and we're probably going to move on to it. Quay Quay, who's one of my most promising young horses. The Australian path in terms of the racing calendar is pretty fixed and pretty laid out on how you get a horse like him to the Guineas. And it's a race every 2 weeks. You start off at a short distance, you work up to the mile. And even more extremely, for a horse that maybe is going to a derby, there's a pretty set path, and or a Melbourne Cup. You've got to do X amount of kilometres, etc. And I just think that sort of formula or what they've done in the past doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way to do it. And I think while it can be hard to, I think you can buck past trends, and you don't have to race every 2 weeks in order to get a horse to the Guineas in the best possible shape, for example. And I think Danny O'Brien showed that by having a horse in work preparing for the Melbourne Cup a lot earlier than has been done before. And in a different method. In the UK, we tend to, it varies hugely, obviously, so I'm generalizing a little bit, or leaning more towards how my father used to train, but we would race horses probably once a month. They would come in as yearlings, and some colts might not leave until they were 6-year-olds. They wouldn't go for spells. And so we would space their campaigns out. They were seasonal, so the winter they would get their break. And I think knowing how that can work very well, it does give me a little bit of an advantage, I think, because it gives me a bit of confidence that I can do that here if I wanted to. If I wanted to not do the traditional Australian route into a race, I know that I can do it a little bit more UK style, and race the horse once every 3 weeks or a month. And I think there are differences, but really I think what it comes down to is training for that horse. You've really got to judge what you're doing based on that individual rather than try and stick to a formula. You've got to try and just look at that horse as an individual and adapt your training for him. And whether you bring that training from your knowledge of how you train in the UK or America or Australia, the more information you have, the more different scenarios you have, the more likely you're going to be able to find one that fits that particular horse.
Yep. And I guess some questions on here, obviously building a stable. So you started from scratch when you came down here. How do you bring horses to the stable? Obviously you buy some yourself. What methods do you use? What do you look for in the sales? Which sales do you attend? But also what other ways are there to get horses into your stable? And what ways have you brought horses into your stable?
Well, I suppose I had a bit of an advantage when I started in that my sister's on the telly, and my old man had come down here and had a crack at the Melbourne Cup. So I had a bit of an advantage over someone starting right from nothing, in that the name was had a bit of recognition, and I think that really helped me get my first 10 horses in the stable. And that's the important thing, to have a few horses in there, to be able to slightly improve them on what they've done before. You tend to get a lot of horses that have had a few perhaps a few careers at other stables, but it gets you going, and it gives you a chance to practice what you do. And then really the only way you've got to do it is you've got to try and sell yourself. Get on the TV as much as you can, get on the radio as much as you can. And Australians are great at it. I thought, in the UK, we tend to not give so much coverage to the young battlers that are trying to make their way. Whereas here in Australia, it's really celebrated, and you can see it every time a young apprentice jockey has their first win or loses their 4-kilo claim. The media really gets behind them and gives them a good push. And then you're sort of on your own after that, but they give you that start, and I think that's really, really helpful. And that sort of certainly helped me in the first couple of years. But then you've got to get out there and you've got to do it. You've got to bring in the results, and you've got to take a fair amount of risk as well. We would go and buy horses at the sales ourselves and try and then sell them on. And that's the hardest part of the job, to be honest, because I'm not really a very good salesman, and I'm not. I sort of tell it as I see it, and statistically, when you buy a horse from the sales, the chance of it being a Group 1 performer are very low, and I tend to say that when I'm selling the horse, so it's probably not the best way to get something sold. But that way we have gently built up our stocks and got new owners in, and I have a particular type of horse that I really like to buy, and you hope that the more of those horses that you like to buy, that you like to train, that you enjoy watching every morning, the more of those you have, the more successful you'll be. It came to fruition last year when we bought that horse, Quay. And so it gives you a real pleasure when a horse that you've bought and that you've sold again onto your clients goes and wins a big race like that.
Yeah, and I think we'll ask exactly what you look for in a horse in the latter stages of the interview, but how reliant are trainers now on pre-trainers? Do you do your own pre-training, or do you use breakers, and why is that so many trainers use the breakers to do the pre-training now?
Mainly, I suppose it's because a lot of us train on a race course, and so we have limited space, and our main business is training racehorses, and breakers require a different kind of discipline, different set of staff, and are possibly also a little bit more risky as well. You can get a few more injuries, so you don't really want to have your best gallop rider risking an injury getting a breaker ready when he should be getting your potential spring carnival challenger ready on the track. So we definitely like to keep a bit of a division there, and while from a business sense, eventually at some point you might want to try and do a Lindsay Park sort of model, where the Hayes team have developed a sort of one-stop shop. They do everything there, and I think that's probably a very efficient and a good way of doing it. But for the moment, most of us can't quite set that up yet. It's something we can all aspire to, but for now we have to bring in pre-trainers and breakers to help us out and get part of the process done. But these guys a lot of them are very good at what they do. They specialize in breaking in horses and pre-training them, and they have a wide range of facilities. My assistant trainer that helped me set up my business is actually branching out in September and setting up a pre-training setup up at Stall, where there's some natural deep sand. And I think that if we can use that, I think it'll add another string to our bow. And it's not something that we couldn't possibly do here because we don't have that sort of facility, and I couldn't do because it's an hour and a half away or 2 hours away, and it's not something I'd be able to go backwards and forwards from there. So by using pre-trainers, it means we again add to those list of options that we can use for our horses.
All right, and I've got the showdown here, Matt. So we'll show that to everyone here. So here's Quay in all its glory. If you can see the mouse there, guys, it's middle of the field there.
Knight, who's about 4 off the rails. Then Archie Peter Beach, Chrome Angel, Galactic Fury, and back behind those right on Tarcoola Diva, grabbed by River Knight. River Knight about a length, Tarcoola Diva, Galactic Fury, and Quay is coming hard. River Knight 100 metres to go in front. Quay is flashing home, is flying over the top. Quay has beaten River Knight. A narrow margin for the big prize. 3 lengths Galactic Fury, third from Miss In Between or Hybrid Theory. Then Just a Tribute. He's a...
I'll never get tired of seeing that.
It's pretty impressive. So we'll just share the screen again here, and then we'll bear with me. So yeah, I've got a mate from the soccer club in that one. That was on the news. So Chris Schumacher, as we mentioned last time. But yeah, it's it must be exciting to get that win for your owners, and I guess how important is success like that early in a young trainer's career to then get some of the big investors, like for example, the relationship that Coolmore has with certain trainers and things like that, that can really be the making of a trainer. How important are wins like that in those first few years?
Yeah, they're absolutely vital, really vital. But they don't necessarily lead to those sort of relationships straight away. Those sort of relationships are built up over many, many years, and require a lot more work than just winning one big race. But it is important to show, particularly for someone like me with my background, it's important to show that I can train a young 2-year-old and win races that can potentially lead to the horse becoming a stallion, and that is really where the money is in this industry. If you can be a stallion maker, then you'll be everyone's friend, and that's certainly what I'm going to be trying to do with Quay. Even though he's got a lovely pedigree, it's possibly not considered a highly commercial one, but really, if he can produce the goods on the track, then he will have an opportunity to be a stallion. But you've got to be realistic. He's a lovely horse. He won that incredibly valuable race, but it was a restricted race to Victorian breds only. It's good to see the second horse in that race come out and run a good second at the weekend. So hopefully the form stacks up. But my horse, Quay, certainly still has to prove himself. And it's how I can take him to the next level that will hopefully, build and bolster my brand and what we do here at Ballarat.
Yeah. So for this season, yourself and Fred Kersley have a 50% win rate at the moment. And Luke Barker says, why isn't young Fred more widely loved? So yeah, you can answer that one.
It's a very good question. I think he had a little bit of bad luck. He rode a bad race once for a big trainer and got a little bit of a slagging on social media for it. And I think things like that can really dent you. And it was just as he was about to lose his claim as an apprentice. And suddenly you go from being, a jockey that has advantage with a claim to suddenly being out there by yourself, a little bit of bad press recently, and you can lose favour. And there's so many good jockeys out there. It's a very competitive market. But for me, I saw an opportunity there. I saw a young lad who was keen to make his way, that had tasted big success because he'd had a lot of winners in the city as a young apprentice, and was really ready to sort of knuckle down, put in the hard work, come up to Ballarat, ride our gallopers, and be part of the team. And I'm really pleased we did that because he's a fantastic team player now, and I think it's vital to have a bit of consistency with horses. Someone that actually has a bit of knowledge about the horse, about what the horse is like on a day-to-day basis, and doesn't just hop on race day and then decide to hop off next time when they get a better opportunity. So I really like to develop that team feeling and attitude. And it does make things a little bit difficult as well, because obviously, trainers and stables go in peaks and troughs in terms of their form. You have periods where you get a lot of winners, and then periods where you can't get one for love and money. And if there's a jockey attached to your stable, that jockey goes through those sort of peaks and troughs as well. And when owners start to question, maybe we should try a different jockey, that makes it very difficult. The jockey then starts to lose a bit of confidence, and it can spiral. So there are positives and negatives to being so strongly aligned with one particular stable. But I think he will start to get a little bit more recognition for what he does. I think he rides beautifully. It's not just that he's a team player. I think he also rides very well and very intelligently. And I think he will, but it takes time. You know, people have relationships with their jockeys, and a lot of people don't just suddenly switch because the new kid on the block is winning races for another trainer. But I think over time they will see the merit in him and give him more rides.
Yep, and that leads me on to the next bit. So obviously your stable has a team, and it's not just Matt Cumani that works for Cumani Racing. And I know you wear many hats, but on most days you'd probably wear 5 to 6 hats at any given time, if not more. But what other staff? So how many staff are employed? How do you recruit your staff? And what does the Cumani Racing team look like for those that might not know what goes into horse training?
Yeah, well, we've got about 27 staff on the books. We're trying to get them all to be full-time staff. You know, it takes a bit of time to become that, but I think it really helps again develop that team atmosphere rather than just being casuals that sort of come and go. It is a bit of a difficult industry though, because you do tend to get a lot of young people that will come and work in their holidays or just after school, perhaps aren't looking for careers in racing, but to do love horses and are looking for a short-term job. So we do get a high turnover of staff, but we have a really good core. For a young stable, we've developed a good core. And I suppose at the moment we're in a slightly difficult position in that we've expanded relatively quickly here at Ballarat. And so we've actually got 3 different stables here on the track. And each of those stables, you know, they are walking distance from the other, but not quite close enough to all work together. So each one has its own team. We've had to make sure we have you know, good people in each of those stables. Whereas normally, if we're all consolidated in one big barn, you know, you could probably rely on one main guy or girl and then have a team underneath them. Whereas here we have to rely on 3, you know, foremen, if you like. But it actually works quite well because you get people that get on with other people and some that don't. And so you can mix and match it and try people in a different barn, different environment if they're not getting on in the other one. So it does work quite well. But I rely heavily on my foreman and our riders. We then got a great office staff, Sam Scally, our bookkeeper and race planner. He really helps. Steve Knight, who's just recently moved from being one of our riders to someone who works in the stable in the morning and in the office, and sort of predominantly does movements, spelling reports, etc. And then on the ground, we got our foreman. We've got Karen Wakeling and Tim Beggs and Alicia San and Jason Di Donato, who do you know, a lot of the more jobs that carry a fair bit of responsibility. And you really do have to rely on them because I can't go around giving horses their treatments or medications. If a horse has an infection and needs some antibiotics, you need to be sure that horse is going to be the one that gets it, not the horse in the stable next door that also happens to be racing that afternoon. So there's a lot of you know, trust and a lot of faith that goes into these guys, and they repay it and do a great job. So it is really vital, and it is hard to recruit people and hard to find them, and we're all competing in really quite a small pool. So we do rely a little bit more heavily than we ought to, I think, on international staff. In fact, the majority of our riders are internationals. It'd be great if racing could develop a much better recruitment process and you know, try and bring a few more Aussies into the sport.
Yeah, we spoke a lot on Monday with Henry about education and how there's no real formal course for anyone that wants to get involved in horse racing, and most of it comes from a hands-on experience, unfortunately, as opposed to other sports where you can actually go and upskill via certain certificates. There are some, but it's definitely an area that is probably one of the negative areas within the racing industry. I've got an anonymous attendee who says their parents have just retired, and would a volunteer retiree be helpful in a stable 1 or 2 mornings a week if they were interested in that type of thing?
Yeah, definitely. We have a guy called Darren who has recently retired as well, but was looking to keep busy. and he's without a doubt one of our best workers. He's no spring chicken, but he's dedicated, he's committed, he's a very good worker, and I think he enjoys it. So yeah, we certainly do. We take people from all walks of life at all stages in life, and so long as they're committed and interested and like their horses, we're definitely always open.
Yep, and I guess the modern trainer has to understand a lot about business, and like you said, it's about promoting yourself, promoting your product, a lot about branding, and all of these things which are not necessarily all down to horse training. Do you feel that sometimes takes away from the traditional training, I guess, as opposed, you have to deal with owners, you have to do all these different things throughout your day, media commitments. Does that take away across the board, not just for your own stable, but do you think that takes away from the training?
It does a little bit, yeah. We to be a trainer, you've got to love your horses and you've got to love being hands-on, and I think because of the nature of it now, you spend less and less time, or you can't spend too much time, going around looking at each individual horse. So the fact that you have to spend so much time on your business does take it away from it a little bit of the fun of it for me. Having said that, part of the reason I love this job is that it is so varied. You spend the morning looking at your horses, training them, trying to pick up on every little minute detail, every little change, really trying to get under the skin of the horse and understand him or her. And then you spend an hour or two in the office coming up with business strategies, dealing with the accounts, dealing with pairs and non-pairs, and general business things that are almost completely unrelated to training horses. And then you travel to various parts of the state. You go racing. You meet, in non-COVID times, you meet owners from all walks of life, and then you drive back and start to plan for the next day. So it's so varied, and that's what makes it so interesting. Every day is similar but different, and it brings with it new challenges. So on the one hand, I do miss that that those days when I just had 10 horses in the stable and you could get to know each one intimately. But on other days, I appreciate and like the challenge of having to run a business as well as understanding the horse.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting dynamic. I mean, in my industry, and obviously football, you're well aware of in the UK, but I sort of liken it to the fact that if you were going to call a big club, so for example, in my position, if I was going to call a big club, I'd get the office and then I'd email somebody there, and it sort of gets passed along the line. I'll never forget the first time I rang the Cumani racing stable, and I rang the mobile number on the website. And I said, "Hi, I was looking to get a number for Matt Cumani," and you said, "This is Matt." And I thought, in what other industry would essentially the top trainer or the top coach, you wouldn't get that in many industries. So it's an incredible industry in the fact that people do have a direct line. And Monday night we spoke a lot about opportunity to promote the spring carnival without crowds, and how behind the scenes footage and all of those things would be lovely, because you get them in other sports. But I guess horse racing is the one sport where you get a direct line to trainers, and that's something that is quite unique. But yeah, it's interesting hearing what you said about the challenges that come along with that. So we'll get on with training now, Matt, because that's what most of the questions are coming through as. So trials and jump outs, what are your, what's the purpose of them, and why are they different to normal gallops at the, at the moment, a lot of trainers are talking about, they're not getting trials regularly, so it's difficult to have their horses up for the races. Why is that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because in the UK we don't have trials or jump outs, although they did try and phase them in a couple of years ago. I'm not sure whether they're still doing that or not, but we prepare horses back in the UK without a trial or jump out. So again, it gives me an interesting it gives me an option, I suppose. I don't necessarily feel that I have to trial or jump out my horse. So it makes us a little bit more flexible when we're in times like this, when we perhaps don't have access to that many opportunities to trial or jump out. having said that, you do have to, it is mandatory before a horse goes to the races for the first time to get a barrier certificate. So it has to be able to jump out in front of the stewards on an official capacity. Every horse will have to do that. But I don't find myself thinking that every horse before it goes to the races will need to have a jump out or a trial before it can be ready for a race. So, for example, Quay, he's going to be going to a race on Saturday week without having had a jump out or a trial. But in my mind, you see a jump out or trial, while they can be very useful if you have a horse that's particularly big and heavy and you need to do that little bit extra that you just can't quite get on the gallops. You need to bridge that gap between what you can do in a gallop and what will be required of the horse in a race. Jump out's a nice sort of little middle ground, a good bit of practice, good bit of a fitness test to fill that gap. But a horse like Quay, for example, and another mare that's running on that day, One More Try, they're horses that are naturally fit, very clean-winded. I would rather not waste the bullet and go to a race which does carry with it a certain level of stress, but has no prize money, and that's effectively what a jump out, almost is. And I'd rather just go straight to a race. And if my horse is 80% fit, then so be it. That first race will bring them on, and I'd rather do that in a race than in a jump out often. So, but obviously, each horse, and as I was saying early, really got to try and adapt for the horse in particular. I think it's a mistake to say, this is my plan for any horse, that it will have to have 2 or 3 jump outs before it goes to the races. I think that's a real mistake. I think if your horse looks heavy and you've done 6 or 7 gallops and he still looks unfit and still isn't handling it, then you need to take that next step. So perhaps you do go to a trial or a jump out, or perhaps you give them 2 before you go to the races. Or maybe your horse is so green that you're worried that it's going to run out at the first turn or be scared of other horses in the race. And so therefore you can take them to the jump outs and where it's less important and give them a bit of practice. But if your horse is fit and well educated and straightforward and intelligent, I think go straight to the races. There's no point wasting time by giving it a jump out.
Yeah, it's something I was meaning to ask earlier with the percentages. So obviously, there is a lot of, in Australia, I'm not sure if it's the same the world over, but there is a big emphasis put on win percentage, which I find as a coach in my sport interesting, because I guess in other sports, it's about, you could be lauded as a great coach by taking an average team and doing well with it. And I guess in horse racing terms, it's the same. I think you should be lauded for having getting the best out of your horses, whether that's winning the race or not. It could still be a good training effort to get an average horse to be better than average or whatever it might be. So I guess, how much emphasis do trainers themselves put on win percentages within the industry itself? Do you guys care as much as we do on the outside, or the media?
I think we all like to, yes. We all like having a great strike rate, and it's all something we work towards. But I think it's also something that's hard to influence. I think it depends on where you are, where you're at that time. If you're a growing, developing stable, we don't turn horses away. If someone wants to send us a horse that hasn't won in 40 starts, we take them on and we try and give them a go, because for me, I'm learning something new. I get a new horse with a different character. Never will have met that horse before. It's got a whole different set of problems and challenges, and I learn and try and improve my training techniques with that horse. And if owners want to send it to me, I'm going to take that opportunity. But it doesn't help my strike rate, because the chances that horse is going to win are very, very low. And so, my strike rate takes a bit of a beating because of that, because of the stage of my career I'm at. In the future, I may decide not to take those horses anymore, and just try and focus on having a good strike rate. But those are decisions you take along the way. I think an interesting one is return on investment, because that means you're outperforming where the market thinks your horses should be racing. I think that's always a nice one to have. So if your return on, or I think it's return on investment, I think that's ROI, you see it on racing.com. If that's above 0, then you're doing pretty well. You're outperforming where the market thinks you should be performing.
Yep. And when do you know if a horse is good or not? That's from Bill Reeks, a question that's come in. So at what stage do you decide, yep, that horse has something?
When it wins, literally. I mean, you can look. We all fall in love with our horses early on. I mean, I've had some yearlings or just new 2-year-olds do a couple of gallops, and I've fallen in love with a couple of them. And and I'll tell myself that they're next year's champions. But it's really just hope at that stage. Not until they win are you really sure. I mean, even Quay, he's a good horse. He's won, $500,000, and yet I still don't know really whether he's a good horse. I see him, I watch him every morning. I love watching him. He's the most beautiful, sort of classic-looking horse. He's got a great sort of temperament, a real cool customer. He's a real pro. I think he's a good horse, but I've seen it too many times growing up with my father, horses that will suck you in, and you fall in love with them, and then they just prove, through no fault of their own, they're just not quite as good as the competition. So the answer is really not until they've proven it. But there are, I think a lot of it is human. We're all particularly poor at analysing things properly. I think, when a horse becomes a good one, if Quay is a champion this year, I will look back and say I always knew it because I love the look of him. But I will conveniently forget about the other 5 or 6 horses that I also love the look of that didn't turn out to be champions. It's very difficult to objectively say when we know when a horse is good, because we'll often get it wrong.
Yeah, I think the return on investment for Quay is fairly good either way, whether he wins another race or not. So I don't think too many complaints coming there. Just with gear changes. So I've had a few questions about gear changes, but what gear changes are there, and what do they affect? What are the main reasons that you would use a gear change?
Yeah, I got a message a minute ago from Luke Barker, who's on this conversation, I think, saying that I was pulling my punches too much. This is probably one area where I will be quite controversial compared to other, or very different in my mindset compared to other Australian trainers. I had a horse run in the Derby last year, and he had a set of blinkers on, and there was every single horse in the race, I think bar one, had blinkers on. And you just would never see that in the UK. You'd be hard pressed to find a horse with blinkers on in a Derby, running over that distance as a 3-year-old. I think there's a real tendency here in Australia to reach for gear changes. In my mind, majority of the time, they make absolutely no difference whatsoever. And people will say, but look at the statistics, look at how many times a horse gets blinkers on first time and it wins. Well, to me, that doesn't make any sense at all. I think that horse was going to win that race, whether it had blinkers on or not. And trainers, I think, lack confidence in their training ability and think that they need to do something to get that horse to, to get that extra percentage out of it to win. And so they put blinkers on, but that horse was always going to win. Look, don't get me wrong. I'm sure there's certainly horses that do improve for blinkers, that do need that focus. But I think majority of the time it's a lack of confidence on the trainer's behalf. So I really push back against putting blinkers on, because I think apart from anything else, I think it takes away, I do this because I love the horse, and I think horses are bred, it's bred into them to try their absolute hardest. They will push themselves through the pain barrier, and to suggest that the horse is ungenuine and isn't trying, and that just putting a set of shades on is really going to make a difference, I think takes away from the horse. It takes away from all the work we do as trainers. It takes away what the rider does every day. It takes away from everything that's gone into producing that horse. When you say, I'm just going to put a nose roll on it or a set of blinkers and suddenly it's going to improve the horse. I think most of the time it doesn't. I mean, look at a horse like Jenkins the other day. I made a mistake. We were going to put blinkers on and the horse had been performing badly. We were going to put blinkers on for one of the last chances of this prep. We forgot to put them on. There was a clerical error in the office. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, and the horse bolted up by 5 lengths. And had he had blinkers on, everyone would have said the blinkers made the difference. But it wasn't. It was the fact that the horse had been running well. He'd been getting the wrong tracks. He'd been having bad luck, not particularly good rides, wide barriers, high weight. And instead, what happened? We found the right race for him, the right condition track, down in class, and he won. And I think, all of that work that went into finding that race, to preparing that horse for that race, would have been marginalized had he had blinkers on, and all the credit would have gone to that little piece of gear, which certainly wouldn't have made the difference.
Yeah, I've just popped a poll up there to see which race people would love to see you win. But just another question on there: the benefits of variation. So obviously we talked about gear changes, but what about the training methods of taking horses to the beach, walkers, hill tracks? What are the benefits of having you often hear trainers talk about even putting them over jumps and things like that. What are the reasons to do that?
Yeah, I'm also a little bit skeptical about a lot of that, to be honest with you. Horses they're creatures of habit and routine, and really all they want is safety. They want a safe environment, and they want to know where they're going, that they're going to be fed. If you can do that, you can get a horse, so long as they're sound and healthy and safe, you can get a horse to its peak condition without having to do anything else. It really is that simple. So the idea of sending a horse down to the beach, it sounds very good, and it's a great marketing tool, and it really appeals to the human idea of having a week off and going to the beach. But actually, horses, when they change environment, it takes them a couple of days to get used to their new environment. That horse is suddenly maybe meeting other horses that have bugs and viruses that your horse perhaps hasn't encountered yet. So the body has to fight off an attack from a virus or a bacteria. It just gets used to its new environment, and then you move it back to its stable, and then it gives all those things to all your other horses. So, again, I think there are some benefits, and I think some horses will benefit from it without a doubt. And some horses, that perhaps don't like the poly track here, they go to the beach and they work on a different surface that works for their conformation and for the various set of problems they have. So there is benefit to it. And if you are stable that has access to a beach, has access to deep sand or water walkers, all these different training tools, the more you can have access to, the more options you have, the better, because you might have a horse that really you need to try different things with. But the idea just that you should just fit it into every horse's routine, I think is problematic, and I think can end up doing more harm than good. So there are no silver bullets in this, and it is convenient. And if suddenly a beach developed down the road from here, I would be spruiking it, and I'd be putting it on our website, and I'd certainly be using it to advertise our business, because it works well, it plays well. But the idea that it is a magic bullet and suddenly it's what makes your stable fly is nonsense, to be quite honest. So I think you do need to be a little bit careful. You can use variation cleverly when a horse needs it, but you also need to fully understand the problems that come with it.
Yep. The poll comes back, Matt, with you winning the Cox Plate. So no pressure, but a Cox Plate winner is what they're asking for. And also, well, Matt Fisher says, what's that? Sorry.
That's handy, because it is a race I want to win, surprisingly.
Yeah, so the synthetic tracks, is there any reason horses don't perform on them or do perform on them? What's some people don't like running their horses on synthetic. I personally don't enjoy watching the synthetic races as much, but what's your opinion on synthetic tracks and why some horses like them?
It's certainly less appealing to watch, isn't it? It's much nicer to see a horse running on a good turf track. And I think there's no doubt about it. The way we've bred horses over the centuries, the best surface for them is a soft 5 turf. But we can't always get that. We can't always guarantee it. Either they're too firm or too heavy. And a synthetic track is a great way to produce a consistent surface for a horse. And so I think the naysayers are mistaken in saying that they're the worst innovation in racing, because I think they are very handy. Every surface carries with it its problems. Polytrack can get some pretty hefty kickback, but then you gallop on a heavy 10, you'll also get a fair bit of kickback. Polytracks or synthetic surfaces tend to be a lot more binding. So when the horse's foot hits the ground, there's less slippage, which means it puts much more strain on suspensories and the ligaments of the leg, of the distal limb. So you need to be very aware of that. You tend to get more of those sorts of injuries, but then you maybe get a lot less of concussion injuries, bone chips, fractures, etc. So with every surface you have problems. What you need to ensure that you do is adapt your horse to that surface before you consistently gallop or race on it. And I think you'll see some horses that have various problems or conformational variances that means that they perform better on heavy tracks or firm tracks. And I think it's the same with a polytrack. It's just a different surface.
Yeah, well, I've just launched another poll there for the participants, Matt. So as you know, we bought the webinar participants bought 3 horses at the gold sale with Troy, and I've said there, if we were going to invest in a horse with Matt Cumani, where would they like you to go and buy us a horse from? And at the moment, English Premier sales leading, so that works time-wise. I guess some votes were for sprint races, some votes were for staying races. What's the difference between training a sprinter and a stayer?
Well, I think sprinters are a bit easier, to be honest with you. I think all you have to do is get them to a certain level of fitness and then do very little with them. And you're kind of trying to build up that level of energy just so that they're about to explode, a bit like a coiled spring. And then you take them to the races and they fire, and then you just give them a nice, easy time between races. I think stayers are a lot more complicated. They're a lot more nuanced. They require a little bit of a different sort of feeling and different approach. You've got to get them really fit, but you can't do too much work with them. You need to make them competitive, keep that sort of speed in their legs, and yet you really need to get them to settle in their races. If they try and burn that energy early on in the race, they're never going to finish it off. And tactically, it requires a lot more thought as well, I think, than sprint races. You've got to really understand the sectionals and how to run your races to suit your horse. And I think that makes them a bit more interesting and more rewarding when you win them. If you have a horse that you get all the right ingredients, you can put a real run of races together, because you sort of get an advantage over that distance. Whereas sprint races tend to, I think, be a lot more down to luck on the day. You see a lot of horses sort of exchange wins with other horses in their same category. I think it's less fun, but other people have different views, and they enjoy the speed of the sprint. And certainly, if I was a jockey, I think I'd prefer to be on a sprinter. Just the sheer exhilaration of a horse that's going, 65 to 70 kilometers per hour. It must be quite exhilarating.
Yeah, and it's always a debate about which one is more important, and obviously Australia is getting a fairly good reputation around the world for sprinters, but there are still some massive staying races, and it's probably something Bart Cummings said about patience being the only thing free in horse racing is probably true. It's probably a patience thing, a lack of patience thing is why we prefer sprinters. The next thing, I'll just go through some of the questions from our participants. So Matt Fisher says there's a lot talked about on breeding lines, but from experiences, certain breeding lines don't guarantee success. What are your thoughts on that? Obviously, with Quay being a turpentine, which is not really a sexy sire, so to speak, but obviously got it done on the track, and there's plenty of horses going around at the moment that are maybe not as popular in the sales ring, but are getting great results. So what are your thoughts on that? How much emphasis do you put on it?
Yeah, well, I think that the first thing to say is that anyone who tells you they know how to buy a top class horse is talking absolute rubbish, because you can't. There is no way of guaranteeing that this horse you buy or this horse you breed will be a top class horse. And the reason that there's proof for that is because otherwise, if that was the case, then you know, everyone with all the money would have all the good horses, and no one else would ever have a chance of having a horse like Quay Quay, who's done so well despite, you know, apparently sort of humble beginnings. But what you can do is try and improve your chances. And I think by understanding pedigrees a little bit, by always trying to buy the best pedigree for the money you've got, or trying to combine that with a horse that, you know, has what you think is important for a horse, and you have to decide yourself what you like about a horse and just go with it. And you're not going to be right. I'm going to be different to my trainer, the trainer next door to me, as to what we think makes a good horse. And that difference is what makes this such a fun sport. We all sort of hang our hat on something. We all think we're right, and every now and then we'll pick the right horse. But the day that you can categorically say which horse is going to be best, and I think that's why we need to be a little bit careful with this genetic testing. You know, at the moment it's so far off from really producing reliable results that it doesn't matter. But one day, the way that science always goes, it may be possible to select which horses are going to be Group 1 horses based purely on their genes. And if we do get to a point like that, it's going to absolutely ruin the sport. So we need to be careful that we don't go down that route blindly and without any sort of regulation, because you know, if we did, then whoever has the most money can afford to do the tests and then battle out for the ones that are guaranteed to be Group 1 horses. Then no one else is going to have a chance, and it'll ruin the game.
Yeah, I've got a question there from Steve, who's saying, asking which sires you like from the UK and Ireland that shuttle down here. But I'll go one further. I'll launch the poll here. So obviously we're buying at the English Premier next year, Matt, and that's what everyone's voted in. You gave me 5 sires you'd be looking at, which are Nakoni, Dundeel, Shalar, Vancouver, and Helmet. So if you could sort of expand on the question, but also explain why you like those 5.
Yeah, well, one horse I'm really gutted that isn't coming down again is Night of Thunder, because he's done a terrific job so far. Apparently he has back issues, which means he can only cover a limited crop, so they're going to keep him up in the UK, which is a real shame because he's done very well. I've had a couple of young horses by Night of Thunder win quite impressively, and that's always a good sign early on in the horse's career.
I've got a pinhook. I've got a Night of Thunder that we're pinhooking from Ireland, Matt. So if you want to buy that for 3 times what we paid for it, we'd be happy with that.
Well, I probably would as well. But I think, you know, on this list, these are the horses I gave you as stallions that I'm interested in. I think Shalar, you know, he's a first season sire. I try and stay away from first season sires, to be honest, because it's hard enough trying to buy a good horse, but entering the lottery of which stallion's going to make it as a top class stallion makes it even more difficult. But I love the Shalars at the sales. They're all beautifully sort of athletic, good walking horses, and that's what I really look for. I love seeing that athleticism. They got to walk a bit like a panther, and you know, I thought a lot of the Shalars did. So I'm sort of banking on him being a successful stallion. You know, that would be a high risk bet, but I think he's a really nice type and one I'd follow. He's similar, actually. I think a lot of his progeny are similar to the Dundeals, and I really liked them in the early days because they had that athleticism about them as well. They weren't too big and heavy. They were sort of, you know, well-bodied horses, but not too heavy boned. They were light and athletic and quick on their feet. I love the Nakonis because I love their temperament. They're such sort of nice, gentle horses. They always look good. They're always sort of in a good coat, even in midwinter. They've got plenty of sort of energy about them and a great temperament. And they would be the sort of horse I would be looking for if I'm trying to improve my sort of sprinter division. Vancouver's, I think, a very promising sire, one of those that fits in this sort of second, third season division, where horses can be a bit of a graveyard for young stallions, but I think he's already shown that he can produce some really top class horses. I've got a couple of yearlings or 2-year-olds by him that are already showing a bit of promise. I know in the last couple of days we've seen a few win recently on some of the tracks around Victoria. I think he's a really promising young stallion. And interestingly, I don't think he necessarily produces 2-year-olds either, even though he won a golden slipper. He's by Medaglia d'Oro, and I think I think had he stayed in training and had a real good crack at things as a 3-year-old and 4-year-old, I think he would have been even better than what we saw at 2. So I think he's going to be a sire that keeps improving. And Helmet's a little bit of a fun one. You know, he's not a stallion that's done as well as everyone had hoped, but we've had a particular success with him. We had a horse called Ryan's Fender, who was particularly close to my heart, and was a really fun horse and one that did really well for us. I've got a horse at the moment called Credence, who's by him, and you know, I seem to have a bit of a connection with them, and when they get over a bit of distance, 2,000 meters and beyond, I think they're even better. So I think he's a horse I'm always a little bit interested in buying his progeny at value at the sales, if there are any left.
Yeah, I think some interesting ones there for sure. The Shalars definitely look good. There were a couple that Kieran Maher bought at the Premier Sale this year, which I really liked, but probably a little bit out of most of our price ranges. But yeah, there's definitely some improvement on Vancouver, and just looks like that could be the next one to boom. Watched the Coolmore virtual stadium parade last night, and wouldn't you love to have their roster? Pretty impressive indeed. So the winner there was Done Deal. So it looks like, Matt, you're going to buy us a Done Deal at the Premier Sale next year. So anyone who's interested in following Matt there, then we'll gather up the troops, and that's our next project, guys, among about 50 other projects that we have going. I'll just whip through these last few questions. So Bill's asked a question. So Bill Reeks has asked a question about the differences in feed when they're in training and when they're not in training. And Darren Fleming just asked what type of feed that you use for your horses.
So I use a nutritionist, feed nutritionist called Peter Huntington. I was introduced to him when he helped us develop a feed that was similar to our UK feed when my father was bringing horses down for the Melbourne Cup. So I really liked the way he approached things and the way he worked. And I've used him to help develop 3 feeds for us. So we have a Cumani Green, a Brown and a Gold feed. And a company in Melbourne, Pet Horse and Farm, mix that feed for us with the specified ingredients. And we use it as a sort of grading. When horses come in, they're on the green initially. It's a sort of cooler feed. It has more fiber and protein and less immediate sort of carbohydrate energy. And it just helps keep the lid on them in the early days. But then as we get closer, as we start, we move into evens, I put them on the brown feed, which has more energy. And then as we go into gallops and racing, then they're on gold feed. And I think that nice progression means that you can always, give them enough energy for the level of work they're doing, and you can tailor it a little bit. When they're out in the spelling paddock, we do hard feed them as well, particularly at times of year when perhaps they're not getting what they should be getting from the grass. And that is a much cooler feed. It's not packed with energy, but it has all the essential nutrients they need to sort of develop bone and affect repairs that perhaps they've picked up from injuries in their prep. So a lot goes into the feed. I outsource a lot of it to this nutritionist because a lot of thought has to go into it, and I'm very happy with where we're at the moment. But interestingly, feed was something that in the old days, I think when my father first started training, you could get a real advantage on feed because people used to just have a very basic feed. They used to literally just feed oats and barley and a little bit of hay. And then people looked into it a little bit more and developed these hard feeds or these sweet feeds that have a lot more nutrients in it. And now you can buy them off the shelf. So you can't really get an advantage by using that. Everyone's on the same sort of quality of feed. But I think there is another evolution to happen because hard feeds aren't particularly good for the horse's gut. They're not really designed to have that high energy feed all in one go. And I think we'll see in the next 10 years another rethinking of how we feed horses, and that can't come soon enough.
Yeah, I got a question from Steve Goodluck. He said, if you got the right horse, and we do need to wrap up soon, guys, so we'll make this the last question. If you got the right horse, would you take them internationally in the future, or do you prefer to keep your good horses in Australia?
Oh, without a doubt. If I had a horse that I thought could compete on the world stage, I would love to do it. I think it's really important that as Australian-based, I'm hoping you've adopted me by now, but Australian-based trainers, we need to show what we can produce down here. And if we have the opportunity that we have we could have a horse that is super competitive here, can win everything, I would without a doubt take him or her internationally and prove it to the rest of the world.
Yeah, and Matt Fisher says in closing he'd like to say that he could ask questions and listen to you talk horses all day. So thanks very much for your time there. But we understand that being a trainer, it's getting late now, but just got a shot there of you being the rising star of last year. I'd suggest that you're still a rising star in the ranks. But going back to one of the questions on the previous page, if you could choose any horse to train that's not one of your own, which horse would you choose right now?
I would look. It's probably boring because everyone would have the same answer. But I think a horse like Russian Camelot would be, a lovely horse to train. He's just got so much raw ability. I think he would really suit our training style. This isn't a play, by the way, Danny. In case you're watching, this isn't a play to try and get him. I'm sure we wouldn't be in the running there, but what a horse! He shows so much potential. Really interesting pedigree as well, and the fact he comes from Europe. He's a fascinating horse all round.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. You've also got a good chance of winning the Melbourne Cup. So. Just to wrap up there, you can see there, a good friend of yours from your younger days, Matt there, Ed Sackville from the UK on our next episode on Monday. We've got Simon Vivian back. We've also got Luke Anderson from the Luca Thoroughbred. So the topic for Monday will be pinhooking, so something different once again. We also had a comment there, which I forgot to mention, because one of our owners in our little syndicate, Hayley Guthrie, is also in serious deal. So I had to give a shout out to the placing today. I said if it got a placing, I'd give it a shout out on the webinar. So congratulations on that one. And fantastic, really, once again, we really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for all the effort that you've taken in answering the questions, but also all your effort in answering questions for myself over the past month or so. It's been great for everyone. I think everyone would agree that you definitely speak as somebody with a passion for the industry, and that helps us gather a passion also.
All right. Well, I just want to say thanks very much, and thank you to everyone who's shown an interest. It's great to be able to come on here and answer some of your questions.
And did you have a question there that you thought was worthy of the hat win out of all of those? I thought the international one by Steve Goodluck was pretty good. If you had the right horse, would you take it internationally?
Yeah, that's definitely a good question. I think that's worthy of a hat, no doubt.
All right, fantastic. So, Steve, good luck. You win the hat. So if you just email me through, I'll get the details to Matt with your address and he'll send it out. Congratulations. And thank you to everyone that sent in questions. It's been a really, really insightful evening. So it's the first time we've done one just with one person on. So, Matt, I thought it was incredible. So thanks again and enjoy your night.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks.